Hello, everybody, and welcome to the DenziBlitz here on the ECS Network. I'm your host, Mike, from Electric City Sentai DenziCaster, and this is part 2 of our 6-part look at Kamen Rider Decade, the Heisei era's 10th anniversary show for the Kamen Rider franchise. Now, of course, for those of you who may have never seen the DenziBlitz before, this is where we go through the shows in rather quick succession. We don't necessarily spend a lot of time on any one episode. We don't go terribly in depth into things on an episode by episode basis. If you're looking for a review like that, I would suggest jumping over to check out DenziCaster, which comes out here on the network on Thursdays. Go check out some of that show. We go through shows in a panel discussion format, and it's more in-depth review. We do a couple episodes at a time. We really sink into the plot and so on. Here on the Blitz, we go through shows more looking at impressions and thoughts overall, and we go through a chunk of episodes at a time. We're going through 5 more episodes of Kamen Rider Decade today. We went through episodes 1 through 5 last week, so this week we are looking at episodes 6 through 10. Now, as we mentioned last week, Kamen Rider Decade has never been released here in the United States commercially, so we are using a fan sub version that you can find free online. As we also mentioned last week, when it comes to fan subs, folks, please, the only thing that I personally would ever ask of you is don't spend money on it, because that money is not going to Toei, Bandai, it's not going to the folks behind the Kamen Rider franchise. So don't pay money for a fan sub, folks. It's not good for anybody in the long run. And if it does come out commercially, then support it and support the official release and product in any way you can. Maybe you buy some figure arts like we've got sitting here behind me, or if it comes out on DVD or Blu-ray here in the U.S., pick it up that way. If it ever has been released commercially, forget the fan sub at that point. Try and track down a legit copy of it, folks. That's what helps the world go round, so to speak, when it comes to shows like this, and us possibly getting them here stateside someday, maybe. So, with that said, you see behind me there are now 5 Kamen Rider figure arts, and that is because we have traveled to a few new worlds. In our first batch of episodes, we checked out the worlds of Kuga and Kiva. You will notice there is no Kiva figure art behind me. That's because Tamashii Nations has never released a Kiva figure art in his base form. Y'all need to get on that. If you make one, I will buy it, and I'm pretty sure I'm not alone. Today we go through 2 more worlds and start on our 5th world, traveling through on Kamen Rider Decade. So today's 5 episodes are Episode 6, Battle Trial, Ryuki World. Episode 7, Super Trick of the Real Criminal. Episode 8, Welcome to the Blade Restaurant. Episode 9, Blade. And Episode 10, Fai's High School's Phantom Thief. So, as we mentioned last week, one of the things about Decade is rather than having the real actors, well, I shouldn't say the real actors, the original characters from the shows show up. Instead, we get alternate realities of these various worlds that Decade is going to travel through. It is a side effect of whatever is happening to the world. So there actually is an in-story reason for why, when he traveled to the world of Kuga, it's a brand new character. It's not Joe Odagiri resuming his Yusuke character. It's Yusuke Onodera. It's a brand new character with many of the same trappings and a few similarities. So another thing that really provides is some creative freedom to the team putting the show together, because in this way they're not beholden to what actually happened in those shows. The idea really is to capture the flavor of the show and the ambiance, but to tell your story or Decade's story within that world. And I personally think that this is a wonderful way to handle it. Now, later on, we are going to see some of the original characters show up, played by their various actors. We've already seen one in episode 1. We see Wataru Kurenai show up, the actual Kamen Rider Kiva, not to be confused with Prince Wataru, the Kamen Rider Kiva of Kiva's World in episodes 4 and 5. So let's take a look here at these episodes and kind of what we get out of them. This series really hammers home the two-part format. Each world is 2 episodes, more or less, so we're going to take them in those kind of chunks. Battle Trial Ryuki's World and Super Trick of the Real Criminal. We are in the world, the alternate reality of Kamen Rider Ryuki. Something that's really interesting about this when you stop to actually think about it is this was, at the time it came out in 2009, this ultimately is the 3rd interpretation of that world, because there is also the television series Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, which was the American adaptation of Kamen Rider Ryuki. So we've actually got 3 different versions of this world. This one strays the farthest from the original source material. So in this version of Ryuki and Ryuki's world, there essentially is a very unique criminal justice system. It is called the Battle Trial, where basically the government has sponsored X number of rider belts, presumably about 12. That's how many were in the original show. And these riders are given the opportunity whenever there is a jury trial. In this case, it is a trial where the death penalty would take place. It's a murder case. The riders are selected. Some are the prosecuting attorneys, some are the defense attorneys, some are people who are somehow directly connected to the case, whether it's key witnesses or family members or what have you. And basically, whoever wins the battle trial, whichever rider is left standing at the end, that one person determines the verdict. And all of these battles take place in Mirror World, this mirrored alternate reality, where if something happens to these people, if they are defeated, they don't actually die. They wind up, they just lose, and they're shunted back to the real world. In the original Kamen Rider Ryuki television series, the premise was very much like Highlander, where they're fighting for an ultimate prize, and in the end there can be only one. But the whole mirror world concept is still there. That's where the battle takes place. So we have that concept, and in those 2 episodes, Natsumi, our female lead, basically gets accused of committing a murder. So the flavor we get out of these 2 shows, we meet this show's version of Shinji and Ren. Again, they retain elements of the names, usually the given name of the various riders. So we meet those 2 characters, Ryuki and Knight, respectively. And they are a former journalistic team, Shinji the photographer, and Ren the writer. This is a slight riff off of the Ryuki show, where Shinji did indeed work in a journalistic outlet. It was not necessarily a paper magazine or newspaper. It was more of an online journal, but he did actually work in journalism. So that's a neat carryover. And the idea that he and Ren are longtime partners. Again, sort of a riff off of the relationship that evolved in the Ryuki television series. I like the actors that got to play the parts. It felt very much like it was rooted in the mythology of the Ryuki series. That's one of the things I've always said about Decade. We mentioned it last week. It's the Whitman sampler box. This is, if you want to try a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and see which shows really whet the appetite that you might want to watch more, this is a wonderful series to do that off of, because you don't get spoiled from the other shows. You just get a little taste of what they're sort of like, without getting the plot and spoilers there too. The story behind the 2 episodes is pretty cool. We actually get to see that that Tsukasa, Kamen Rider Decade, actually does care. about Natsumi. We see that relationship is legit. We also get introduced to a new Ryuki rider. Now, that's one thing that this show, from memory, doesn't do often, which is create a new character out of thin air, a new rider. But they do for this episode, for this two-parter. They create Kamen Rider Abyss, who is a shark-themed rider in the Ryuki world, so, sort of following the design aesthetic and the power sets and such from Ryuki. Pretty cool character, though, all the way around. Ultimately, Natsumi is absolved of her charges. Decade joins the battle trial, and eventually they figure out that it is Abyss the entire time who has done this, but in such a way that no human being could have actually committed the crime. There's something supernatural to him, and it serves as a really good segue into the next two-parter. We find out that our shrouded, trench-coated, hat and glass-wearing antagonist, our mystery character, is experimenting. Abyss is an undead, which is the monstrous race from Blade's world. So he has somehow brought this undead into Ryuki's world as an experiment. And that serves as our transition into the Blade episodes. Welcome to the Blade Restaurant and Blade Blade. This is a bigger departure than the Ryuki ones for me. The Ryuki episodes still kind of feel like they're Ryuki and have all the trappings of Ryuki. The only difference is that instead of it being a Highlander-style battle among the riders, it is the criminal justice system of that world. Here, we're in Blade's world, we meet the undead, and it's almost a what-if. In the actual television series Kamen Rider Blade, the riders have their powers from a organization called Board. And Board exists essentially to contain the undead. And I'll be honest, I have a problem with these two episodes. But that problem comes from I've seen Blade. So if you've never seen Blade and all you watch is Decade, this is not going to be a problem for you. But in Blade, spoilers for a show you may have never seen, but it happens incredibly early in the series, the organization of Board essentially is more or less destroyed and disbanded very early on in the series. Probably, I would say, in the first 5 episodes or so, if not sooner. This is what might have been. Board is a major corporation. Same goal, contain and fight the undead. But they take the playing card motif of Blade to its farthest possible extreme. In Blade, the playing card motif, there are 4 suits: Heart, Clover, Diamond, and Spade. Clover being clubs for those of us here in the U.S. And you have ranks going from 2 to Ace, just like a deck of playing cards. So there are 52 undead by that rationale, and each undead, once they are sealed, are contained in a card that ranks them and gives them a suit, and those are used by the various riders, and there are 4 riders, 1 per suit of cards. In this show, they also use that as a way to rank employees. It becomes a corporate structure at Board. And it's very odd because there's a line that Decade uses very early in the episode. He refers to it as Kamen Rider Salaryman. And he's not that far off. That's kind of the vibe you get. And it has a pastiche of business corporation kind of deal that is very different than Blade, and frankly very different from any Kamen Rider show that's ever come out before or since, to be perfectly honest. They are employees. The riders are employees of Board. They can be granted or stripped of their powers as need be and have them given to other people. There's definite benefits to being an ace, which means you are a rider, to being king, queens, and jacks, which means you are high-level support personnel, Then there's 2 through 10, which means you are various levels of entry level to middle management kind of deal. Um, and in that world, in Ryuki's world, uh, Tsukasa is a defense attorney. He takes on a new role for each world. Well, in the world of Blade, he apparently is the head cook at board. He is the chief of the cafeteria. And he becomes obsessed with being the best. He wants to become an ace, and he is insulted that he is not when he starts out. So it's very interesting in that regard. Um, the characters are pretty equal to their temperament from Blade. Kazuma is the guy he's not in it for anything other than to be the good guy. He wants to defeat the undead and save people. That's what he's there to do. Um, Whereas Kamen Rider Garen, whose name in the show escapes me, but Garen, who is the Diamond Rider, is the company guy. He's the company guy in Blade. He's the company guy in Blade's world on Decade. And then you have sort of the wild card rider in Callus, who is the Hearts, and then you have who sometimes is good and sometimes is bad, and then uh, you have the unstable and ambitious Kamen Rider Liangle, Mitsuke, in this show, which very much relates to his character from Blade. So they get all of that very well done. The only part that I take objection to, frankly, is the concept of the undead. So I've always felt that Kamen Rider Blade, which is a really rough show to marathon, I'm not sure that that's ever going to be part of DenziBlitz. Maybe one day. But Kamen Rider Blade as a show has one of the coolest villain monster concepts ever, and that is the undead. And they define undead in this show not as vampire or zombie or something like that, but they define undead as literally unable to die. They cannot be dead, which leads you to a type of new challenge for the writers, where it's not simply enough to kick them in the face and watch them blow up. They have to contain them, hence the cards, and it is from containing them that they gain power. In this show, we see the Blade Riders doing just that. We see them containing undead. But then we see Tsukasa, and Decade is able to outright destroy them. And we see a little bit of that from Blade characters in the second episode. They are able to outright destroy the undead, which to me kind of flies in the face of the high-level concept of Blade. And that's one thing that Decade doesn't do a lot of from memory. They do not change the high-level concept of any of the worlds or series. But to me, they really do that with the Blade episodes. So they are fun episodes, and they have some fun moments, but that bounces me out of them just a little bit, that they perhaps tinkered too much. We also get a sense of what Yusuke's role in this series is going to become. Yusuke is probably one of the most divisive alternate reality writers ever, in part because he follows Joe Odagiri's Kamen Rider Kuga from 2000, which was immensely popular and is probably single-handedly responsible for the revival of the franchise in a lot of ways. If Kuga had bombed, there probably wouldn't have been an Agito and continue on forward. So it's led to a lot of people even referring to his character as useless instead of Yusuke. But what you get here is a character who is the interpreter. And you see that a lot in these first 4 episodes. He interprets Tsukasa's actions. Tsukasa might not even mean consciously to do what Yusuke attributes his actions to. But he is the one who is able to look to these other characters and go, no, this is what Tsukasa's doing, and this is why he's doing it. And it's actually a good thing, and it's a good guy, and he's not bad. And he's really the guy that helps a lot of the alternate reality writers understand and accept Kamen Rider Decade as not the destroyer of worlds, but as a fellow Kamen Rider. So I like that. And I like that tint on the character. Now, I don't recall from memory if that's the way the character continues, but that's what we're seeing so far. And then episode 10 is the first part of a two-parter, and that is when we go to the world of Fies. When we go to Fies High School's Phantom Thief. And again, we get a pretty huge departure from what happened in Fies. In Fies, there is a big corporation called Smart Brain. They have constructed these masked rider system belts that are going to be used to presumably help stop the threat of the Orphanok. The Orphanok are another interesting high-level concept for a villain, in that every Orphanok starts as a human. Some humans have the ability upon death to be immediately reborn in this monstrous Orphanok form, but not all of them. And so as the Orphanok race tries to procreate and expand, human beings are going to die, because the only way to become an Orphanok is to die as a human being, and maybe you have the seed that makes you an Orphanok. In this show, that high-level concept is still pretty much there, except instead of it being a shadowy corporation, it's a high school. And the lead Orphanoks in the show, in Decade, a group called the Lucky Clover, are trying to figure out who Fies is. Kamen Rider Fies protects the high school and its students. So we're trying to figure out who Fies is. At the same time, because here is a world where Kamen Rider, the secret identity is a big deal, we have two other characters trying to discover Fies' identity. One of them is obviously Tsukasa. He has to figure out who Fies is in order to help him and accomplish whatever his goal is in this world. But we also meet one more character whose figure is not over here. Give me just a second. And that is Kamen Rider D-End. I need to take him back out of the box and get him back up here on the shelf so we can have him with the rest of the characters. D-End is actually the secondary rider of this series. His aesthetic is very much like Tsukasa's, except that his color is cyan, where magenta is Decade's color. D-End is a thief, or a bounty hunter, or something. What? We don't really know. We know that he wants the Fies belt too. We don't know why. We also know that he knows our shadowy figure and finally puts a name to him. So we have him sit there and name our shadowy trench-coated figure. And what I hate is the fact that I've had that name on my head for pretty much the entirety of the last couple episodes, and I have now completely forgotten it and blanked out on his name. Narutaki, that's his name. Okay, so he knows that Narutaki is the name of this shadowy figure. What's more, that shadowy figure knows that D-End is not someone to be trifled with, so they have a history. D-End knows Decade, rather. We actually first see him as a character in Blade's world, in the cafeteria. We see him become D-End for the first time in this episode. The aesthetic, the look of D-End is far from my favorite secondary rider costume. It's interesting, it's different, but that's really about as far as my opinion of it really goes. So when we have him show up, it now creates a rival character. So the dynamic we have here at first among our Decade riders, you have Decade, who is the hero, the main protagonist. We have Kuga, who is his secondary rider, and we have D-End, who is the rival to Decade. And how that plays out and such should prove pretty dang interesting. I'm looking forward to continuing our journey through the Decade. We are 1/3 of the way through. We've got a lot more to go. So 21 episodes and a movie are left on tap on our 6-part series. So folks, we sincerely hope that you join us next time here on The Blitz. Please remember to share, like, subscribe, all the wonderful things you do on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/DenziCaster. All those places will pop up on the graphic after I get done yammering. And please check out all the other shows here on the ECS network. And if you feel so inclined and you want to help us out here at the network, go to our Cafe Press store. It's cafepress.com/ECS network. We got some cool t-shirts and other novelty things there for all the great shows, the announcer's booth, Rage Quit Radio, DenziCaster, and all kinds of other great stuff. So go there and check that out too. Any money that comes from that store goes to support the network. Lines nobody's pockets. We need new cameras. We need new lighting. We need new microphones. We need new computers. We need lots of stuff, folks. And all of us do this for the love of the game and have full-time jobs and mortgages and car payments and all those other things that you do too. So obviously we're on a budget. But if you can help us out, please feel free to do so. Until next time, folks, when we will continue our journey, I'm Mike, just a passing through video show host, and we'll see you next time on The Blitz.